Taewon Kim stood at the edge of the landing zone, his broad shoulders rigid against the setting sun of Kepler 186f. The twin moons hung low in the purple sky, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Around him, soldiers prepared for tomorrow's deployment, but none came within 5 meters of where he stood. They respected him. They feared him. They called him the Flame Eater. He checked his weapon one last time, a heavy plasma thrower that most soldiers couldn't carry, let alone fire, with accuracy. The metal was warm against his calloused hands. 6 years of war had turned his once soft hands hard, just as it had hardened everything else about him. "Kim, Staff Sergeant Kim," a voice called from behind. Taewon turned slowly. Captain Minho reapproached, datapad in hand, looking nervous despite outranking him. "Sir?" Taewon answered, his voice low and even. "The lieutenant wants all squad leaders for the final briefing. 10 minutes in command." Captain Ree shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "He said to tell you especially, the medical outpost at New Seoul is top priority." Taewon nodded once. Captain Ree looked like he wanted to say more but thought better of it and walked away quickly. Everyone had heard the stories, how Taewon had stood alone against 50 Vespari warriors on Proxima Centauri B, how he had walked through enemy fire as if it couldn't touch him, how he had turned his plasma thrower on the alien horde and created a wall of blue flame that burned for 3 days afterward. The soldiers who witnessed it said he didn't just fight the fire, he consumed it, absorbed it, became one with it. The Flame Eater. Taewon reached up and touched the small scar behind his right ear, the only visible sign of the neural implant that dampened his pain and fear. The doctors called it a combat efficiency enhancer. The other soldiers who had received the experimental tech called it a blessing. Taewon knew better. With each use, the implant took something from him, little pieces of his humanity, shards of emotion that disappeared and never returned. He walked toward the command center, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. Soldiers stopped and stared as he passed. He ignored them. "Well, if it isn't the man himself," a cheerful voice called out. Despite himself, Taewon's mouth twitched in the ghost of a smile. Hae-in Lee jogged to catch up with him, her communications gear bouncing against her back. "Stop scaring the new recruits, Tae," she said, falling into step beside him. "Half of them think you'll eat them if they look at you wrong." "Good," he replied. "It'll keep them alive longer." Hae-in was the only person who spoke to him like this. They had grown up in the same neighborhood in Gwangju back on Earth. She had known him before the war, before the implant, when he had been just Taewon, the quiet boy who helped in his parents' noodle shop and dreamed of becoming an engineer. "You're going to the briefing?" she asked. He nodded. "Me too. Lieutenant Park requested all communications specialists." She looked up at him, her expression growing serious. "I heard things about New Seoul, bad things." Taewon said nothing, but he had heard the reports too. The Vespari were pushing hard into human territory on Kepler 186f. The insectoid aliens had changed their tactics, focusing on medical facilities and supply lines rather than military targets. New Seoul was the largest medical outpost in the sector, treating both human and surrendered Vespari wounded. The command center was a prefabricated structure in the center of the base. Inside, Lieutenant Ji-ho Park stood before a holographic display of New Seoul and the surrounding area. He was young for his rank, but his eyes held the weariness of someone who had seen too much combat. "Attention," someone called as Taewon entered. The room snapped to attention. "At ease," Lieutenant Park said. "Take your seats." Taewon remained standing at the back of the room. Ji-ho Park's eyes met his for a moment, and the lieutenant gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. "The situation at New Seoul has deteriorated," Park began, gesturing to the holographic map. "Intelligence suggests the Vespari are planning a major offensive in the next 72 hours. Our job is to reinforce the outpost defenses before that happens." The hologram shifted, showing the layout of the medical facility. The outpost currently houses 327 patients, 52 of whom are surrendered Vespari. Medical staff number 45 with only 12 having any combat training. Park looked around the room. Command considers this facility essential to the war effort. The work they're doing there, treating Vespari wounded, learning about their biology, could be the key to ending this conflict. Taewan listened silently as the lieutenant outlined their mission. They would deploy at dawn, establish defensive positions around the facility's perimeter, and prepare for the coming attack. They needed to hold until additional forces could arrive, expected in 5 to 7 days. As the briefing concluded, Taewan started to leave when Lieutenant Park called out to him, "Staff Sergeant Kim, a moment, please." Taewan stopped and turned. The room had emptied except for Park and Haein, who lingered by the communications console. "You've seen the Vespari up close more than anyone," Park said. "What are we really facing?" Taewan considered the question. The neural implant made tactical assessments easier, emotions less intrusive. They're adapting, learning. This isn't just about territory anymore. What is it about? Breaking our will. Taewan's hand drifted to the scar behind his ear. They've noticed our tendency to protect the weak and wounded. They see it as a flaw. Park nodded slowly. "And what about the surrendered Vespari at the outpost? Can we trust them?" "The Vespari have no concept of surrender. Those who can't fight are discarded." Taewan's voice remained flat. "The ones at New Seoul have been cast out. They have nowhere to return to." "That's why they're helping our medical teams," Haein added. "The intelligence they've provided has saved thousands of lives." Park studied the holographic display. "I'm giving you point on this mission, Kim. Your squad will form the primary defensive line around the medical facility." Taewan nodded once. "And Kim," Park added, his voice lower, "I know about the implant. Medical sent over your file. How bad is it getting?" Taewan felt Haein's concerned gaze on him. The implant was supposed to be temporary technology, but removal had proven impossible without catastrophic neural damage. Each use further integrated it with his nervous system. "I can still do my job," he replied. "That's not what I asked." Taewan met Park's eyes. "It's manageable." Park held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. "We deploy at 0600. Get your squad ready." Outside the command center, Haein caught up with him. The night air had grown cold, and their breath formed small clouds in front of them. "You didn't tell him the truth," she said quietly. "The truth doesn't matter, only the mission does." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop and look at her. "Tae, I saw your last medical scan. The implant is spreading. Dr. Jun said it's affecting new areas of your brain." He gently removed her hand. "It makes me better at keeping people alive." "At what cost? You barely sleep. You hardly eat. Sometimes when I look at you, I can't find the person I grew up with." For a moment, something flickered in Taewan's chest, an echo of the man he used to be, reaching out from beneath layers of technological suppression, but the feeling faded quickly, smothered by the implant's cold efficiency. "We leave at dawn," he said, turning away. "Be ready." As he walked back to his quarters, the soldiers he passed still whispered his legend to one another. The Flame Eater, the man who couldn't be harmed, the perfect soldier. None of them knew that with each passing day, with each activation of the implant, less of Taewan Kim remained inside the legend they had created. And as he prepared for what would become the bloodiest battle of his career, he wondered how much of himself would be left when it was over. 3 days passed without incident at New Seoul. The medical outpost sat in a shallow valley between rocky hills, its white buildings gleaming under the alien sun. Taewan Kim had positioned his squad at key points around the perimeter, creating overlapping fields of fire that would catch any approaching enemy. For 72 hours they waited. For 72 hours nothing came. "Maybe intelligence was wrong," said Corporal Dae-jung-oh as he scanned the horizon with binoculars. He was young and eager, new to Taewan's squad. "Maybe the bugs decided to attack somewhere else." Taewan did not respond. He stood on the watchtower, his plasma thrower resting against the railing. The neural implant behind his ear hummed softly, feeding him tactical data from the sensors they had placed in the surrounding hills. The Vespari were coming. He knew, it with the same certainty that he knew the sun would rise tomorrow. Staff Sergeant Hyen's voice crackled through his comm unit. Lieutenant Park wants you at command. They picked up something on the long-range scanners. Taewon made his way to the command center, a repurposed storage building at the heart of the medical complex. Inside, Park stood with the outpost's head doctor, a thin man named Dr. Jun, studying a holographic display. Kim, Park said without looking up. What do you make of this? The display showed heat signatures moving toward New Seoul from the north and east, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They're not hiding their approach, Taewon observed. This is not a stealth attack. It's a show of force, Park agreed, his face grim. They want us to see them coming. Dr. Jun wrung his hands nervously. We need more time to evacuate. We have critical patients who cannot be moved quickly. How many transport shuttles do we have? Park asked. 3, Doctor, Jun replied. But they were designed for supplies, not mass evacuation. We would need at least 6 trips to get everyone out. Park turned to Taewon. We need to buy time. How long can we hold them? Taewon assessed the tactical display, the neural implant, processed the data coldly, calculating odds and projected casualties with mechanical precision. With current forces, against these numbers, he said evenly, 12 hours. Maybe 18 if we fall back to defensive positions inside the facility. Park's face hardened. That's not enough. We need at least 48 hours for a complete evacuation. Reinforcements won't arrive for 5 days. Then we need to make them think twice about a direct assault, Taewon said. Show them the cost will be too high. Recommendations? Let me take my squad into the northern pass. We can trigger the mining charges we placed to create a bottleneck, force them to come at us from the east only. Park nodded. Do it. I'll coordinate the evacuation with Dr. Jun. Priority to critical patients and essential medical staff. As Taewon turned to leave, the door opened and a woman in a medical uniform rushed in. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and exhaustion shadowed her eyes. Dr. Jun, she said urgently, the Vespari patient in Ward C is conscious. He's trying to communicate something. Dr. Jun moved toward the door but stopped to introduce her. Lieutenant Park, Staff Sergeant Kim, this is Combat Medic Song Mi-yoon, our xenobiology specialist. Song Mi looked at Taewon, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. Everyone knew the legend of the Flame Eater, but where others looked at him with awe or fear, she looked at him with something like curiosity. The patient, she continued, turning back to Dr. Jun. He keeps making a sign we haven't seen before, some kind of warning, I think. As they hurried out, Taewon felt a strange sensation, one the implant couldn't quite suppress. For a brief moment, the medic's gaze had touched something inside him, something he thought was long dead. He pushed the feeling aside and gathered his squad. They had work to do. Hours later, the first wave of Vespari struck from the north. Taewon's squad had rigged the pass with explosives, creating a rockslide that crushed dozens of the insectoid aliens. But the Vespari kept coming, climbing over their dead, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming in the setting sun. The sound of battle echoed across the valley, plasma fire, explosions, and the high-pitched shriek of Vespari warriors. Taewon's squad fell back to the perimeter as planned, slowing the enemy advance but unable to stop it. By nightfall, the situation had grown desperate. The first evacuation shuttle had departed with the most critically wounded, but 2 more transports were needed before even half the patients would be evacuated. Taewon entered the medical facility to report to Lieutenant Park. Inside, the hallways buzzed with frantic activity. Medical staff rushed between wards, preparing patients for transport, administering sedatives, and speaking words of comfort that sounded hollow against the backdrop of battle. He found Park in what had once been a surgical theater, now converted into a temporary command post. Maps and tactical displays covered the surfaces. The lieutenant looked up as he entered, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. Northern perimeter is lost, Taewon reported. Eastern line is holding, but they're bringing in heavier units. We've lost 12 soldiers, Park grimaced. The second shuttle leaves in 30 minutes. We need to hold until then. A commotion outside drew their attention. Song Mi-yoon rushed in supporting a wounded soldier. Lieutenant, she called. The Vespari are targeting the landing pad. They're learning our evacuation pattern, she helped the soldier onto a table, quickly applying a pressure bandage to his shoulder wound. Her movements were efficient, practiced. Despite the chaos, she worked with a steady calm that Taewon found himself admiring. We need to change the extraction point, she continued, administering pain medication to the wounded man. If they hit the next shuttle, we lose everything. Park studied the tactical display. There's a secondary landing zone here 2 kilometers east, but the shuttle pilots need someone to secure it first. I'll take a team, Taewon offered. Song-mi looked up from her patient. I'm coming too. You'll need a medic if the area is hot. Park hesitated, then nodded. Go. The shuttle launches in 25 minutes. Signal when the LZ is secure. As they prepared to move out, an explosion rocked the building. Lights flickered and dust rained from the ceiling. The Vespari had breached the outer defenses. Kim, Park said quietly as Song-mi went ahead. If this position falls before all shuttles are away, you get the medical staff out. That's your priority now. Their research is too valuable to lose. Taewon nodded once. Outside, he found Song-mi waiting with a small medical pack and a sidearm strapped to her thigh. Night had fully fallen, and the twin moons cast an eerie blue light across the battlefield. Stay close, he told her. If I signal you down, you drop immediately. She nodded, her expression serious but unafraid. I've been in combat before, Staff Sergeant. They moved through the shadows, accompanied by 2 of Taewon's squad members. The sounds of battle grew behind them as more Vespari forces assaulted the main facility. As they approached the secondary landing zone, Taewon activated his neural implant to full capacity. Cold clarity washed over him, dulling his emotions and sharpening his senses. The world became a tactical problem to solve, nothing more. But as Song-mi moved beside him, he found himself oddly aware of her presence in a way the implant couldn't filter out. When she spoke into her comm unit to coordinate with the shuttle pilot, he noticed the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes. New Seoul is falling, she said softly as they secured the landing zone. All that work, all those lives we saved, both human and Vespari. For what? Taewon had no answer. The implant had no protocol for philosophical questions. But as the shuttle descended toward them, and the horizon behind them glowed with the fires of the burning medical facility, he found himself wondering the same thing. The second evacuation shuttle lifted off from the landing zone, its engines glowing bright against the night sky. Taewon watched until it disappeared among the stars, carrying wounded soldiers and critical patients to safety. On the horizon, the medical facility of New Seoul burned. The Vespari had overrun the northern section entirely. Staff Sergeant, we need to get back, said Corporal O, checking his weapon nervously. The bugs are spreading through the valley. Taewon nodded once. He turned to Song-mi, who was gathering her medical supplies. Stay between me and Corporal O. We move fast, no stopping. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the distant fires. What about the third shuttle? There are still patients waiting. Lieutenant Park will handle the third evacuation. Our orders are to return and reinforce the eastern perimeter. They moved through the darkness, avoiding open ground. Twice they had to stop and hide as Vespari patrols passed nearby. The aliens communicated with clicks and high-pitched whistles that set Taewon's teeth on edge, even with the neural implant dampening his reactions. As they approached the facility, the sounds of battle grew louder. Plasma fire lit up the night in blue and green flashes. Through his tactical comm, Taewon could hear scattered reports from the defending squads. They were losing ground by the minute. The main entrance is compromised, he told his small team. We'll use the service tunnel on the east side. They were 50 meters from the tunnel entrance when the ambush came. 6 Vespari warriors dropped from the rocks above them, their segmented limbs clicking as they landed. In the moonlight, Their compound eyes gleamed with an alien intelligence. Tae-Wan reacted instantly. His plasma thrower came up, and a wall of blue flame engulfed the nearest 3 Vespari. Their exoskeletons cracked and popped in the intense heat. Corporal O fired his rifle, dropping another. But the 2 remaining aliens lunged forward with frightening speed. One tackled Song-Mi to the ground. The other slammed into Tae-Wan, knocking the plasma thrower from his hands. Sharp mandibles snapped near his face as he struggled with the creature. It was stronger than him, its exoskeleton providing natural armor. Tae-Wan reached for the combat, knife at his belt. The neural implant surged to maximum output, flooding his system with artificial calm. He felt no fear, only cold calculation as he drove the knife into a gap in the Vespari's armor, between its thorax and abdomen. The creature shrieked and thrashed. A scream cut through the night. Song-Mi Tae-Wan twisted the knife deeper, and the Vespari on top of him went limp. He shoved it aside and rolled to his feet. A few meters away, Song-Mi was pinned beneath the last Vespari. Corporal O lay motionless nearby, his helmet cracked open. As Tae-Wan lunged forward, the Vespari warrior raised one of its forelimbs. In the moonlight, something gleamed wetly at the tip, a stinger dripping with fluid. It plunged down toward Song-Mi's exposed neck. Tae-Wan's hand shot out, catching the limb mere centimeters from her skin. With a savage twist, he snapped the appendage off. The Vespari shrieked in pain and fury. Tae-Wan drove his knife up under its head, ending the sound abruptly. He pulled the dead creature off Song-Mi and helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, then rushed to Corporal O's side. After a quick examination, she looked up. "He's alive, but his skull is fractured. He needs immediate medical attention." Tae-Wan lifted the unconscious soldier over his shoulder. "The medical bay, if it's still secure. Can you walk?" "Yes." Song-Mi retrieved her medical pack and Tae-Wan's plasma thrower, struggling slightly under the weight of the weapon. "Let's go." They reached the service tunnel without further incident. Inside the facility, the situation was worse than Tae-Wan had expected. Wounded soldiers lined the corridors. Medical staff worked frantically among them, but there were too many injuries and not enough hands. They found Lieutenant Park in what remained of the command center. His left arm was bandaged, and exhaustion lined his face. He looked up as they entered, relief briefly crossing his features. "Kim, Yoon, good." He nodded to Corporal O. "Get him to Triage 2, it's the only medical bay still functioning." Song-Mi took O from Tae-Wan's shoulder with the help of another medic, then disappeared down the corridor. "Status?" Tae-Wan asked. Park gestured to the tactical display. Most of it was red, indicating Vespari-controlled areas. "We're holding the east wing, barely. The 3rd shuttle is loading now. We've prioritized the remaining critical patients and essential medical research. The rest of us will have to hold until reinforcements arrive." "How long?" Park's expression hardened. 4 days at best. "We can't last that long, Kim. Not against these numbers." "The research?" "Evacuated on the 2nd shuttle." Song-Mi's work, with the surrendered Vespari. It could change the course of the war. A soldier rushed in, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "Sir, the Vespari have breached the south corridor. They're heading for the landing pad." Park grabbed his weapon. "Kim, secure that shuttle. Nothing stops it from taking off." "Nothing." Tae-Wan nodded and ran toward the landing pad. The corridors were chaos, wounded being moved, soldiers taking defensive positions, equipment being abandoned. He passed Medical Bay 2 and caught a glimpse of Song-Mi working on Corporal O. At the landing pad, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The shuttle was nearly loaded, but Vespari forces had reached the outer doors. A squad of defenders held them back with sustained fire, but they were being overwhelmed. Tae-Wan gripped his plasma thrower and waded into the fight. The weapon's energy core hummed as it charged, then released a wave of blue fire that engulfed the leading edge of the Vespari assault. The aliens shrieked and fell back, their exoskeletons blackening in the intense heat. "Get that shuttle airborne," he shouted to the pilot. For 15 minutes, he held the line alone. The neural implant pushed his body beyond normal human limits, allowing him to ignore fatigue and pain. The Vespari kept coming, and he kept burning them. It was what had earned him his name, the Flame Eater, standing unmoved in the face of overwhelming force. The shuttle engines fired up behind him. It would be the last evacuation. Anyone left behind would have to hold until reinforcements arrived or find another way out. As the shuttle lifted off, something struck Taewon from behind. He stumbled forward, feeling a sharp pain in his back. A Vespari had flanked him, using the bodies of its fallen comrades as cover. Before he could turn, it struck again, a razor-sharp limb slicing through his armor. Taewon fell to one knee. The neural implant struggled to compensate for the damage, but he could feel something wrong, a burning sensation spreading from the wound. Vespari often coated their weapons with neurotoxins. He forced himself to stand, to raise the plasma thrower, one more time. The blue fire washed over the remaining attackers, but his vision was already blurring. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the shuttle disappearing into the night sky. When Taewon opened his eyes again, he was lying on a medical table. Bright lights above him made him wince. The pain in his back had spread, becoming a fiery agony that the neural implant could not fully suppress. "Don't move," a voice said beside him. Song-mi leaned over him, her face tense with concentration. "The toxin is spreading. I've neutralized most of it, but some reached your implant." Taewon tried to speak, but his throat felt raw. "The shuttle?" "Got away safely." She worked as she spoke, injecting something into his neck. "Lieutenant Park is organizing the remaining forces. We're down to 18 combat-ready soldiers and 11 medical staff." Taewon felt something strange happening inside his head. The neural implant was malfunctioning, its signals becoming erratic. For the first time in years, emotions began to filter through its barriers: fear, anger, confusion. "Your implant is damaged," Song-mi explained, noticing his expression. "The toxin corroded part of the control unit. I can't repair it without specialized equipment." A wave of sensations washed over him. Smells suddenly seemed stronger, lights brighter, sounds sharper. Without the implant's dampening effect, the world assaulted his senses with an intensity he had forgotten was possible. "How bad?" he managed to ask. Song-mi met his eyes. There was no pity in her gaze, only professional assessment. "Bad enough. The implant is partially fused with your neural tissue. As it fails, you're going to experience a flood of suppressed emotions and sensations. It will be disorienting, possibly debilitating." Taewon closed his eyes. The Flame Eater, brought down not by enemy fire, but by his own malfunctioning technology. Without the implant, he was just a man. And men felt fear. "I need to get back to the fight," he said, trying to sit up. Song-mi placed a firm hand on his chest. "You will. But first, you need to adjust. Let me help you through this. I've seen neural shock before." As she spoke, her voice became an anchor in the storm of sensations overwhelming him. The implant had been suppressing not just fear and pain, but everything else too. The full spectrum of human experience. Now it all came rushing back at once. "Tell me about something," he said desperately, needing distraction from the chaos in his mind. "Anything." Understanding flashed in her eyes. She began to speak, her voice steady and calm. "I grew up in Busan by the sea," she said. "My family had a small restaurant on the waterfront. Every morning, I would help my father buy fish from the boats coming in. The air always smelled of salt and seaweed and tea. Morning came to New Seoul with no dawn. Thick smoke from burning buildings blocked the sun, casting the medical facility in perpetual twilight. In what remained of the command center, Lieutenant Park gathered the survivors, 18 soldiers and 11 medical staff, all that was left of the outpost. "Reinforcements are still 3 days out," Park said, his voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. "Our perimeter is shrinking. We can't hold this position much longer." Taewon stood at the back of the room, leaning against the wall for support. His body felt strange to him, too sensitive, too vulnerable. The damaged neural implant sent occasional bursts of static through his nervous system, making his muscles twitch unpredictably. "What are our options?" asked Dr. Jun, who had stayed behind with the remaining medical team. Park pointed to a map displayed on the cracked screen. There's a forward operating base here, about 20 kilometers southeast. If we can reach it, they have defensive capabilities and communications equipment. We could call for an emergency extraction. 20 kilometers through Vespari-controlled territory, Taewan said. It wasn't a question. Park nodded grimly. We move in small groups, 3 to 4 people max. Less chance of detection that way. We leave in 1 hour. As the meeting broke up, Taewan made his way to the medical bay. His head pounded with unfamiliar sensations. Without the implant's regulation, every sound seemed too loud, every light too bright. Emotions he hadn't felt in years surged unpredictably. Fear, anger, hope, despair. He found Songmi checking supplies, her movements efficient despite her obvious fatigue. She looked up as he entered. "How is it?" she asked, immediately noticing his discomfort. "Manageable." He lied. She gave him a look that said she knew better. "I've prepared a stabilizing agent. It won't repair the implant, but it might reduce the neural feedback." She held up a small injector. "It will help with the pain at least." He nodded and sat on a nearby stool, tilting his head to expose the damaged implant behind his ear. As she administered the injection, he noticed a sheen of sweat on her forehead and a slight tremor in her hands. "You're sick," he said. Song-mi put the injector down carefully. "It's nothing, fatigue. Don't lie to me." The words came out harsher than he intended. Another side effect of the failing implant. Emotions coloring his voice in ways he couldn't control. She met his gaze steadily. "During the ambush, the Vespari that attacked me, its stinger grazed my arm. I've been treating it with antibiotics, but their toxins are persistent." Taewan felt something twist inside him. Concern. It was an emotion the implant had always filtered to almost nothing, reducing it to a tactical consideration. Now it hit him with unexpected force. "How bad?" "Bad enough." She echoed his own words from earlier. "But I can still walk, still fight if needed." Before he could respond, Hyen appeared in the doorway. Her communications gear was scorched from battle, and a fresh bandage covered her left arm. "Park wants us moving in 30 minutes, she said. "We're in group 2. You, me, and Songmi." Taewan nodded. "We'll be ready." After Hyen left, Songmi continued gathering medical supplies, packing them into a small bag. "I've prepared doses for both of us," she said. "Enough to keep us functional for about 48 hours. After that," she didn't need to finish. "After that, the neural implant would continue to deteriorate, and the Vespari toxin in her system would spread." They were both on borrowed time. 30 minutes later, they joined Hyen at the facility's rear exit. Lieutenant Park was there with the first group checking weapons and supplies. "Stay off the main routes," Park told them. "The Vespari have patrols everywhere. Use the ridge lines where possible. Their exoskeletons make it harder for them to climb steep terrain. If you encounter enemy forces, avoid engagement unless absolutely necessary." He handed Taewan a small device. "Emergency beacon. Use it only. When you reach the fob or if you have critical intelligence, every transmission gives away our position." Taewan tucked the beacon into a pocket. Park looked at each of them in turn, his expression grave. "Group 1 leaves now. We'll create a diversion to the west. Your group follows in 10 minutes. Groups 3 and 4 at 5-minute intervals after that." As Park's team moved out, Taewan checked his plasma thrower. The weapon was running low on energy, maybe 3 or 4 good bursts left. He had a sidearm with limited ammunition, and his combat knife. Not ideal for a 20-kilometer journey through enemy territory. "Ready?" he asked Hyen and Songmi. Hyen adjusted her communications headset. "Ready?" Songmi nodded, though her face was pale and drawn. The journey began in silence. They moved, from shadow to shadow, using the smoke-filled air as cover. The landscape around New Seoul was rugged, rocky outcroppings and steep ravines carved by ancient rivers. Good terrain for staying hidden, but difficult to traverse quickly. By midday, they had covered nearly 5 kilometers. In the distance, they could hear sporadic weapons fire, other groups encountering Vespari patrols, or perhaps Park's diversionary attacks. "We need to rest," Heian said as they reached a sheltered gully. "Just for a few minutes." Taewon wanted to push on, but he could see Songmi was struggling. Her breathing was labored and her skin had taken on an unhealthy gray tone. He nodded, and they took cover under an overhanging rock. Songmi sank to the ground, leaning against the stone. She took a medical injector from her bag and pressed it against her neck. Some color returned to her face, but her hands still trembled. "How much longer will those work?" Taewon asked quietly. "Not long enough," she replied. "The toxin is adapting. Each dose is less effective than the last." Heian looked between them, concern evident in her expression. "We need to pick up the pace. At this rate, it will take us 2 days to reach the fob." Taewon knew she was right, but he also knew Songmi couldn't move any faster. He made a decision. "Heian, you go ahead. Scout the path, find the safest route. We'll follow your markers." She frowned. Park said to stay together. Park said to reach the fob. "This gives us the best chance." He gestured to Songmi. "She needs more time than we have." Heian hesitated, then nodded. She understood the unspoken message. If Songmi couldn't make it, at least one of them should reach safety. "I'll leave trail signs. Look for 3 stones stacked together for a safe path. 2 stones for caution. 1 stone means danger. Find another way." She checked her weapon. "I'll try to stay within comm range, but no promises in this terrain." After she left, Taewon turned to Songmi. "Let me see your medical bag." She handed it over without protest, a bad sign in itself. He examined the remaining injectors. 3 for her, 2 for him. "Not enough." "Tell me about the toxin," he said. "What exactly does it do?" Songmi closed her eyes, conserving strength. "It targets the nervous system, starts with muscle weakness, progresses to organ failure. The Vespari use it to immobilize prey." "Is there an antidote?" "We were working on 1. Using antibodies from the surrendered Vespari. The research was on the 2nd evacuation shuttle." Taewon felt frustration rise within him, another new emotion, raw and powerful. So much knowledge lost, so many lives at stake, and they were stuck here in this gully while the answers flew away on a shuttle. "Rest a little longer," he said. "Then we need to move." As Songmi dozed fitfully, Taewon kept watch. The neural implant continued to malfunction, sending occasional jolts of pain through his skull. But with the pain came clarity. For the first time in years, he was thinking without the implant's cold calculations guiding him. He was feeling the full weight of their situation, the fear, the determination, the growing concern for Songmi. The legend of the Flame Eater seemed distant now, like a story about someone else. He had been a weapon, pointed at targets and fired. Now he was just a man trying to get a wounded comrade to safety. When Songmi woke an hour later, her condition had worsened. She tried to stand but couldn't support her own weight. The toxin was progressing faster than she had admitted. Taewon made another decision. He removed his combat webbing and began modifying it, creating a harness that would allow him to carry her on his back. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Getting you to the fob," he replied simply. "I'll slow you down. You should go ahead with Heian." Taewon continued working on the harness. "The Flame Eater would leave you. I'm not him anymore." He helped her into the improvised carrier, securing her against his back. She weighed less than he expected, too little, as if the toxin was already consuming her from within. "Try to rest," he told her as he began walking. "Save your strength." "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her breath warm against his neck. Taewon thought about it as he navigated the rough terrain, following Heian's trail markers. The old him, the one governed by the implant, would have calculated the tactical value of saving one medic against the risk to the mission. He would have made the correct choice based on cold logic. But the implant was failing, and with its failure came the return of something the Flame Eater had lost long ago: his humanity. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. Night fell across the rugged landscape of Kepler 186f. Taiwan moved steadily through the darkness, following Hei-In's trail markers. Songmi lay against his back, her breathing shallow, and her skin burning with fever. The Vespari toxin was spreading, faster than expected. "We should stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the night sounds. "Just for a little while." Taiwan shook his head. "The forward operating base is still 10 kilometers away. We need to keep moving." But he knew they couldn't continue much longer. They had been traveling for nearly 12 hours. His muscles ached from carrying Songmi, and the damaged neural implant sent sporadic jolts of pain through his skull. Each time it happened, more emotions broke through: fear, determination, concern for the woman he carried. He found a small cave formed by fallen boulders and carefully lowered Songmi to the ground. She leaned against the rock wall, her eyes reflecting the light of Kepler's twin moons. "How bad is it?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Bad enough," she replied with a weak smile. It was becoming their shared joke, a small defiance against their situation. Taiwan checked her pulse. Too fast. Her skin was slick with sweat despite the cool night air. "Last injector," she said, reaching for her medical bag with trembling hands. He took it from her and administered the dose himself, pressing the injector against her neck. Some color returned to her face, but they both knew it was temporary. "It won't be enough," she said quietly. "The toxin has reached my major organs. I can feel it." Taiwan refused to accept her words. "We'll reach the base tomorrow. They'll have medical supplies, proper equipment." Songmi placed her hand on his arm. The simple touch sent a wave of sensation through him. Another side effect of the failing implant. Every contact, every feeling was magnified. "Listen to me, Taiwan," she said, using his name for the first time. "The research I was doing with the surrendered Vespari, it was important. We discovered something about their toxins." He leaned closer to hear her fading voice. "The toxins carry genetic material. It's how they communicate biologically. We were developing a counteragent, a way to introduce human genetic material that could rewrite the toxin's programming." She took a shuddering breath. "My blood contains prototype antibodies. If I don't make it, they need samples." "You'll deliver them yourself," Taiwan insisted. She smiled sadly. Always the stubborn one. The legend of the Flame Eater mentioned that. Before he could respond, his comm unit crackled. Hei-In's voice came through, broken by static. "Tay. Position. Vespari patrols everywhere. Fob in sight, but surrounded. Cannot approach." The transmission cut off abruptly. Taiwan tried to re-establish contact, but there was only silence. "She's in trouble," Songmi said, struggling to sit up straighter. Taiwan checked his weapons. The plasma thrower was nearly depleted, and he had only a few rounds for his sidearm, not enough to fight through Vespari patrols. A new sensation rose within him, not fear, but something deeper. Resolve. The implant would have calculated the odds and determined their situation hopeless. But the man beneath the legend didn't care about odds. "We need to move," he said, helping Songmi to her feet. "But first I need you to do something." He removed his shirt and turned to show her the back of his neck, where the neural implant's control unit was partially visible beneath the skin. "Disable it completely," he told her. "No more half measures." She stared at him in shock. "That could kill you. The implant is fused with your neural pathways. It's also holding me back. The Flame Eater was a weapon, not a person. I need to be fully human now." Songmi hesitated, then reached for a small surgical tool in her medical bag. "This will hurt," she warned. Taiwan braced himself. "Do it." The pain was immediate and overwhelming, a fire that spread from his neck through his entire body. He bit down on a piece of cloth to keep from screaming as Songmi carefully severed the implant's main connections. The world spun around him, colors and sounds blending together in a chaotic rush. When it was over, he lay gasping on the ground, his body trembling uncontrollably. But his mind felt different, clearer, more present. The constant background hum of the implant was gone, replaced by a silence that seemed to expand within him. Songmi watched him with concern. "Are you okay?" Taewon took a deep breath, then another. Sensations flooded him. The cool night air on his skin, the distant sounds of alien insects, the smell of soil and rock. But most of all, emotions, powerful and unfiltered. Fear for Hae-in, determination to complete their mission, and something else, something he hadn't felt in years. "Hope, I'm better than okay," he said, rising to his feet. "I'm alive. Really alive." He helped Songmi into the carrier harness again and set out toward the forward operating base. Without the implant, his muscles protested more strongly, and fatigue weighed on him. But he pushed through it, drawing on a strength that came not from technology but from within. They traveled through the night, avoiding Vespari patrols by staying in the shadows. Dawn was breaking when they reached a ridge overlooking the fob. As Hae-in had reported, the base was surrounded by Vespari forces, at least 50 warriors patrolling the perimeter. Taewon set Songmi down carefully behind a cluster of rocks. Her condition had deteriorated further. Her breathing was labored, and her eyes struggled to focus. "Stay with me," he urged her. "We're almost there." He took out his binoculars and studied the situation. The base was still operational. He could see defensive turrets and communication arrays, but the Vespari had it completely surrounded, cutting off any approach. "There," Songmi whispered, pointing weakly to the eastern side of the compound. "That looks like a blind spot in their patrol pattern." She was right. There was a gap in the Vespari coverage, a narrow window where they might slip through undetected, but it would require timing and luck, things the Flame Eater had never relied on. "I need to find Hae-in first," Taewon said. "She must be out there somewhere." He adjusted the comm unit frequency, trying to avoid detection by Vespari communication. Scanners. "Hae-in," he whispered. "Position." After a moment of static, a faint reply came through. "Northeast ridge, 500 meters from your position. Pinned down." Taewon made a decision. "I'll get Hae-in, then we make for the blind spot together." Songmi grabbed his arm. "You can't carry both of us." Her voice was fading, but her eyes remained clear and determined. "Leave me here. Get Hae-in to the base, then come back if you can." He shook his head firmly. "No one gets left behind. Not anymore." Taewon moved Songmi to a more sheltered position, making sure she was comfortable and hidden from view. "I'll be back soon," he promised. "Stay alive," she managed a weak smile. "That's an order, Staff Sergeant." He moved quickly along the ridge, keeping low to avoid detection. Without the implant, fear made his heart race and his palms sweat. But there was clarity in the fear, a sharpening of his senses that the implant had never provided. He found Hae-in hiding in a small ravine, her leg bleeding from a Vespari attack. Relief flooded her face when she saw him. "Tae, I thought you were dead." She looked around. "Where's Songmi?" "Safe for now, but we need to move fast." He examined her leg. "Can you walk?" "With help," she said grimly. He supported her as they made their way back to Songmi's hiding place. When they arrived, Songmi was unconscious, her breathing so shallow, it was barely visible. "She's not going to make it," Hae-in said softly. Taewon checked Songmi's pulse. Weak, but still there. "Yes, she will." He took the emergency beacon from his pocket. It would signal their position to both the fob and any Vespari in range. A risky move, but they were out of options. "When I activate this, we'll have minutes at most before the Vespari converge on us," he told Hae-in. "I need you to get to the blind spot we identified and into the base. Tell them about Songmi's research about the antibodies in her blood." Hae-in frowned. "What about you and Songmi?" Taewon secured Songmi in the carrier harness one last time. "I'll create a diversion, draw them away from your position." "That's suicide, Tae." He met her eyes. "Maybe, But it's my choice. The flame eater would calculate odds and make the logical decision, but I'm not him anymore. Understanding dawned on Heian's face. The implant? Gone. This is just me now. He helped Heian to her feet, made sure she could move on her own, then carefully lifted Songmi onto his back. Her weight seemed lighter than before, as if the toxin was consuming her from within. Ready? He asked. Heian nodded, her eyes shining, with unshed tears. Ready? Taewon activated the beacon, then handed it to Heian. Go. Now. As she moved toward the blind spot, Taewon headed in the opposite direction, making no attempt to hide. The Vespari would see him, the human carrying another human vulnerable and exposed, but they would also see something else. Not the flame eater of legend, but something more powerful. A man who had chosen humanity over cold efficiency. A soldier who refused to leave anyone behind. Behind him, Heian disappeared into the perimeter of the base. Ahead, Vespari warriors began to move toward him, drawn by the beacon's signal. Songmi stirred against his back, her breath warm against his neck. They're coming, she whispered. I know, he replied calmly. Why did you come back for me? The odds. Some things matter more than odds, Taewon said, adjusting his grip on her. Some fires don't consume. Some fires light the way home. As the Vespari closed in, Taewon Kim, once known as